You are watching the video version of the Marketing Should Be Fun podcast. We are so glad that you are here. If you prefer to listen to podcasts, you can find the Marketing Should Be Fun show on any of your favorite podcast platforms, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere else. But most of all, we're so glad you're here, and I hope that you enjoy today's conversation. Well, welcome back to another episode of Marketing Should Be Fun. My name is Austin Savage, and I'm not here with Kelsey today, but I am here with a good friend. We go way back. Her name is Lisa DeWeert. She is the co-founder of a really cool organization called Moxie Adaptive, and they are seeking to create a space that connects and empowers individuals with limb differences. And it's something that I'm really excited for all of you to hear more about and to explore the journey of what growing that brand has been like. So, Lisa, hello. It's so good to see you, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so pumped. I'm unnecessarily pumped. But anyway, thanks for having me. You've done your research about Moxie. That's awesome.
We go way back. Our families used to go on vacations together, which I feel like we always just like to bring up anytime we see each other. Like, it's just a very
remember that
strange
time we
thing.
were in Colorado?
And like neither of us remember it actually, but we just have a picture of it, and so we just pretend to remember it.
There's proof that it happened, and we know it happened. And it's one of the weirdest things I have with anybody in my life. So glad to share that with you.
You were actually so we had an episode recently where I talked about the opportunity that I had to go speak to a college class. And that was your college class as well. So thank you for having me, because in that episode, I shared that it was one of my favorite work-related experiences that I've had this year. And so thank you for the warm welcome, providing that opportunity. And just how cool. You're doing so many things. Like you're doing so much.
Well, I was going to say, what was so great about having you come is you facilitated such an awesome conversation. Like while you were there, and even like in the classes following, like you really have become a common name in our classroom right now.
So funny.
I'm like, remember what Austin said about da-da-da? And I'm like, yeah, you're still thinking about it. Like you really did provide such a perfect environment for students to be thinking about, their self-confidence, like where they're headed. And it really gave them like kind of like how you were reflecting, but kind of gave them permission to start dreaming now and have the autonomy to do it now. So anyway, I'm forever grateful for you bringing that value.
I love to hear that like it has, just like continued forward, because, like, and I'm sure for some students, there obviously are times where it's like, okay, that was helpful, but then it's like you kind of move on to other things, or it didn't, doesn't connect as deeply. But I love like that for some of your students that it really has been something that it's like, oh, like we want to keep coming back to this idea and be thinking of, what we care about and who we're wanting to become, and what the opportunities are before us, and all of those things.
And it always, it's such a good reminder too, because I feel like me and you are in similar spaces of like, we're like committing ourselves to self-growth, and we're in these kinds of environments all the time where like, for instance, listing out self-affirmations to yourself. To us seems like such, it's like, man, Austin, you wrote a book about it. You've been in you've been in that world for a long time. Like, I went through coaching in that, but my students are hearing that for the first time of, wait, it's actually not selfish, and it's actually not me focused and wrong to think about what I'm good at, you know, and like I actually need to utilize that. And so what gets me excited is this is kind of their first introduction, or for a lot of my students, kind of the first introduction into who am I going to be in my adult life, and what am I going to like, how am I going to get there? And so to bring alongside just caring, successful adults that aren't too far from their age, I think goes such a long way. So
that's so fun.
Thank you again.
Well, I already have so many questions. But you just mentioned that affirmations have played a big part in your life as well. That's something that like has been big for you. What role have affirmations specifically played for you?
I think it would start about 2 years ago. I started getting really into the Enneagram, the personality assessment.
What are you?
And I hired a life coach.
Nice.
I'm a 2 wing 3.
Ooh, opposite. I'm
what
an
are
opposite.
You?
3-wing 2.
3-wing 2. Ooh, that could be a fun conversation. Okay.
Good.
I hired an Enneagram life coach. Shout out to Callie, was really instrumental in my life about 2 years ago. And she had me read this book, What to Say When You Talk to Yourself, by Shad Helmstetter. And it really changed the game for me, because my mentality before going through coaching with Callie was self-affirmations are kind of dumb and kind of silly and kind of stupid. Yeah. And you feel pretty awkward saying them. And let's quit lying to ourselves and saying these statements that aren't true, right?
Wow. That
was my mentality before. And then I went through coaching and I read this book and I learned that, and this has kind of been a pivotal change for me, that your brain cannot necessarily decipher what's true and what's not. It's just going to act upon any message that you send to it, if that makes sense. So when one of the examples that they use is like, if you walk into a room and you like have the internal thought of, oh gosh, I suck at learning names.
Yeah.
And you say that to yourself, and then you go around and meet a bunch of people, you just commanded your brain to suck at learning names. Yeah. And so you're actually not going to learn names because your brain doesn't know if you're good or not. Your brain can't decipher what's actually reality and what's not, but it can decipher that you just told it to suck at learning names. Yeah. So there's a lot of kind of neuroscience that goes into that. But that really became my shift for self-affirmations and how I could make that shift of, okay, I'm not just making up sentences. I am creating intentional statements that I am commanding my brain to learn how to become to be true, if that makes sense. So
it does.
I think that's been the biggest shift for me with the affirmations.
That's so cool. I love just that, even that example, because like what a difference it makes, if you walk into that same room and, even if you don't feel like the sentence would be true of like, I am great at learning names, even just shifting it to saying like, I am capable of learning people's names here. Like it is just that shift that it's like suddenly, you're thinking of opportunities, you're approaching that room differently because you are, focusing on what you can do rather than what you can't. And I mean, that almost like snowball of momentum, even just in your brain, like begins to be created. And then you make new connections and then new opportunities are created in your life. And all of that just, begins with like how we're thinking. So that's really cool. That
insane. It's the compound effect, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the classic compound effect. And to me, it's like knowing what to say to yourself is the first step in all of that. And the book kind of walks you through like the different levels of self-talk. But one of them that stood out to me was like, even just shifting the sense to, I'm going to try today to learn names, even just saying that is helpful. Oh my gosh, you ordered it.
I did. I haven't read it, obviously. I just got it.
It's so good. It's so good. Yeah. So even just like framing how you're saying it to your brain and the messages that your brain is receiving, like you can actually use that for you and it doesn't have to work against you. So
yeah, that's so good. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to talking about like Moxie and a little bit of what that is and why that is so close to your heart, why you were part of co-founding it. So give us a little background on you kind of like and where that vision came from. I know that you started it with a couple other people, as well as what Moxie is. Then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Oh man, I gotta watch the time because I could talk about this for 2 hours.
I love that though. That's awesome.
So I guess I'll start. Sometimes I breeze over this part of the story, but because you all love marketing and kind of media, I think that this part of the story might be interesting. But when I had just graduated from undergrad, I got my degree in interpersonal communication and was going to grad school. And in grad school for communication, you kind of have to pick your niche, so to speak, like your intricate, weird little relationship dynamic that you're going to dive deep into for the next 2 years.
Totally.
And so I was right on the brink of that. I just started grad school and I was sitting at home watching The Bachelor, of all things. We love that, right? This is going to be a story and why actually binge watching reality TV can lead to really amazing things. And I can still remember the exact moment. It is such a vivid memory. I was sitting there with my roommate, Anna, and we were watching The Bachelor. It was Bachelor in Paradise. If you watch the show. But anyway, it was the episode where the girls were giving roses to the guys. Okay. And there was a girl or a woman on Bachelor in Paradise. Her name's Sarah. And she was born with one arm and was on Bachelor in Paradise. And so she called up somebody, a guy that she was seeing or interested in to come get a rose. And the process is that the girl has to pin a rose on the guy's suit coat jacket. Yeah. And it was such a 3-second moment on TV. And I'm so glad that they kept it in. But she goes, so-and-so, will you accept this rose? He says, yes. And she goes, you're going to have to help me put this on you. Or like, can you help me? Or it was some brief sentence of like, oh, can you help me put it on you? Yeah. And he did it. It was great. Life went on. Yeah. And I was over there, like sitting there being like, wait, that would be me. It was such a classic example of seeing myself represented in the media. And it was so impactful that I ended up sending her a DM on Instagram and kind of went back and forth with her a little bit. She, at the time, had a nonprofit for people with limb differences and disabilities. Then I ended up meeting up with her in Chicago and went out to Utah with her for this retreat. And it was, cool. It was life-changing. Yeah. So couple lessons, watch reality TV, and number 2, send the DM on Instagram because you never know what it'll come to. But,
absolutely. That's so cool.
And so, over the last couple of years, me and her have kept touch for sure, but just through some transitions with her organization and whatnot. But I made some really deep connections of women that I met there. And then as well, then I went back home and it completely changed the trajectory of my grad school research and focused on disability communication then for the next 2 years of my grad school because that experience really gave me it was such a turning point in my journey of having a limb difference and a disability that I was like, man, this is a part of my story that I'm ready to like start sharing and start having it be a bigger part of my identity. And so went home, started researching. So then I met probably 100, I'm not even exaggerating, probably 100 women through that research, with limb differences. And so, just kind of started building this community without intentionally really trying to build it. But it was just because, man, I just had this in-person experience. Now I'm focusing the next 2 years on researching what it's like to have a romantic relationship and have a disability and what that means and dating and all the fun topics. And so all these women just kind of started coming and responding to my research call of willing to participate in my study. And through these conversations, I just learned so many things through my research. I learned that number 1, people with disabilities are really terrified to talk about the nuanced things about their disability. And a lot of them had never, ever talked about it before. I was shocked at the results. There were women who had never talked about their disability, even with their romantic partner, because the risk of sharing such a vulnerable part of you was so high. It was just so uncertain because they just never grew up with the skills or the communication or the even need to be vulnerable about that part of their identity. Yeah. And all of a sudden I'm asking them these questions about man, when was the first time that your romantic partner asked you a question? Or, when was the first time that you overheard your romantic partner talk about your disability to somebody else? Yeah. And how did that make you feel? All of these questions that I felt like because of my lived experiences, I kind of knew what questions to ask. And it really was just oh my gosh. And from those interviews, they would just keep contacting me being like, can we keep talking about what we were talking about? Even though we're done with the study and I know you published it and I turned it into a textbook chapter, which is something that I'm so proud of. That's so cool. Making an impact in that part of the world. But really just developed a community of people with disabilities through my research. and they want to keep talking about it.
Yeah. When you say kind of back to, your opportunity to meet that person from the Bachelor in Paradise, which is so cool. Yeah. You said that was a turning point for you, like in even just how you viewed your own limb difference and, your life. What did that mean for you? Like what did that turning point look like in your mind?
Man, that's such a good question. I think I'll give a kind of silly answer and then more of a deep answer. The silly answer was like, wait, that means I can go on The Bachelor?
That's so fun.
Right? I mean, literally, I was sitting there and it almost kind of flashed me back to like, and it sounds so silly, but it almost kind of flashed me back to like, I don't know, growing up, like I really didn't have a problem with my limb difference. I loved that my arms were different. It really wasn't a hurdle for me necessarily.
Yeah.
But as I'm reflecting and getting older, I was able to kind of articulate some things that I'm like, well, I could never be a teacher because I can't write on the dry erase board.
Yeah.
And it was such weird, like disqualifiers that I had for myself,
Okay.
And now I'm a teacher and I don't have to draw on the dry erase board and I can ask my students to run up and write a word on the board if I need to, you know what I mean? Yep. But watching that moment on The Bachelor, it was kind of like, wait, I could do that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of the like silly answer. I think the more impactful answer was, wait, I think I'm ready to start talking about this more because before, if I were to see somebody similar to me in the media or even in real life, I kind of would want nothing to do with it growing up. I'd be
really?
Like, no, you're not like me. Yeah. It's a really weird, and I'm sure a lot of people with disabilities can relate to that. But I think because every disability is so unique, when we're like, you'd be like, oh, you remind me of my uncle who was in a wheelchair. And I'm like, great, that's actually not my limitations at all. So it was always really, the comparison has always been really difficult. Because I think deep down it's like, oh, I don't really want to know how you're perceiving me. And if you're perceiving me the way that I'm perceiving that person, like that doesn't make me feel good. Right. Which is such an inherent, that's such exposing, these like awful misconceptions that even I had about disability,
for sure. Wow.
So I think that was kind of the second part of that was just, wait, why am I getting fired up by this? Why was this such a turning point? Why am I so excited to become friends with Sarah? That was the first time in my life that had happened.
Before you had that kind of turning point, if somebody had come to you and asked the same questions that you were asking as part of your study later, would you have had the same kind of responses as many of the people who were part of your study?
Oh, what was so fascinating about my research was I was really looking for common themes.
Okay.
I ended up interviewing about 30 women. I was really looking for these threads, that kind of went through people's stories. It was so difficult.
Really?
Every story was
so unique.
So different and so unique. I would talk to women who their Instagram handle was, my disabled best friend, like people who their disability was their personality, was a part of their identity.
Yeah.
And then you had people who, my gosh, this, like me interviewing them was their very first time, quite literally, ever talking about it.
Yeah.
And being really nervous to talk about it. And so I guess when you ask, like, would my questions be the same? It's like, well, yeah, like even for some answers, like, my study was specifically on dating. So, some answers, it's like, man, when you're on dating apps, do you show your limb difference on dating apps?
Yeah.
I've had experiences where I haven't. Man, when you go on a first date, is that something that you want to bring up before or after? Have you ever been on a blind date? Have you, all of these things. And so I think it was such a self, introspective process for me to process 30 other women's stories because I could see myself in various parts of them. But man, it's such a journey. I feel like my answers 3 years ago would be significantly different than what they would have been now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I brought you back, but you were in the middle of your story. So you've started building this community. How did that become Moxie?
Yeah. I told you we could talk for hours about this. So, it was after grad school, and I graduated in 2020. So talk about COVID lockdown. Okay. So we're rewinding to about summer of 2020. And I had just finished my research. I had just defended. I had just got my master's. And then, but I still had all of these women that I had just talked to for the last 2 years in this study. And they were so invested and wanting more and reaching out and wanting phone calls and wanting, to talk about a first date that they had just gone on and how proud they were that they had grown since the last time that they had talked to me, or had a weird, interaction with somebody that they wanted to process. And I was just sitting there being like, I have to do something about this. Yeah. People don't have, I can't be their only friend, I started being like, no, I want to connect all of these 30 women together, not me, but this is you guys, Yeah. And so kind of right around the same time, there was a group of women that had kind of, from all my kind of various experiences in the disability world, were saying, hey, you guys want to do something? Should we start something? And I was like, yes, absolutely. So we literally just kind of started having Zoom calls, and we didn't even think it was going to turn into anything, but it was almost just in response to, we need community. So let's have these Zoom calls where we're going to talk through some weird nuances of our life. And probably within about 6 months, we went, why don't we start an Instagram page? Why don't we start making this into something that people could find? And so we ended up doing that. And then, from there, it kind of just naturally evolved into, from those women who wanted to be on, more of a leadership role. And it just kind of all fell into place pretty quickly of, we have someone on our team who does fundraising and nonprofits for universities full time. And that's such a helpful perspective. And we have somebody passionate about social media. And, I was kind of coming in, bringing in the women that I had participated in my study. And so it was kind of this beautiful puzzle just being put together. Yeah. But it definitely, I don't want to over glorify it. It was hard. And I think one of the biggest things that I wish we would have done differently is, because we couldn't see the return right away, it was hard to keep going. Yeah. And all of us had full-time jobs. None of this all of a sudden we decided to make our full-time career. And so
what was the return that you were looking for that you didn't see right away? What was that kind of the gap that you felt?
I think the gap that we felt was we were putting in so much time and energy for us just to be posting on social media. Yeah. And we never wanted it to be a social media organization. We wanted it to be in person. We wanted to connect people. Yeah. But it had to be on social media because of the lockdown. So I think just naturally that was the more difficult part. And it took a lot of time, developing, this, I'm talking to the marketing guy, developing a logo. Who do you go to for that? We don't have money, totally developing a mission statement. Well, when you have, 6 wonderfully women full of wisdom trying to create a mission statement, there's a lot of ideas, so it took about a year to kind of figure out, what are we all about? What do we want Moxie to be? What are we focusing on? What's the why behind what we're doing? The people kept coming, our growth has been pretty consistent on social media, but then even more so just in-person connections. And now why I love Moxie the most is when I meet somebody in person, I have somewhere to direct them to. And I go, oh, you live in Denver? I have 3 friends in Denver who would love to connect with you. That's been the most rewarding part. And we just didn't have that at the beginning, and now that we have such a widespread, we launched an ambassador program. So we have about 10 ambassadors across the US.
Incredible. Wow.
So I feel like now when I meet somebody, it just happened. I was at a work training in Atlanta last month, and a guy came up to me. He goes, hey, my daughter has your arms. And I was like, there's no way. That's crazy. And he lives in Denver. And I was like, man, yeah, we have a Moxie chapter in Denver. Go check it out. So it's just giving them a place to go to have those in-person experiences.
Yeah. How did you guys move, being especially that first year, it felt like we're stuck just being this social media organization. This isn't what we want. This is not what we're trying to build. How did you kind of tactically move from being this presence and, and representing your brand online to creating these in-person communities across the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the biggest things that we quickly realized was when you looked at our business or when you looked at our organization from social media, none of us were ever together because we were spread across the United States. And so one of the things we just started doing is posting who's in Chicago. Hey, I'm going to be at this coffee shop on this date. Come hang out. Hey, who's in Denver? I'm going to be going on a hike at this time. Just show up.
Yeah.
Who's in Seattle? The first time I did that was and kind of throughout my research have been in these Facebook groups for people with disabilities. So I'm kind of in these like weird niche, Facebook groups. And I just posted, hey, I'm going to go look at Christmas lights. I grabbed one other friend, with a limb difference. And I said, hey, do you want to come look at Christmas lights with me?
Yeah.
If nobody else shows up, it'll just be fun for the two of us. And if people show up, the more the merrier.
Better.
And so me and her just posted on Moxie and said, we're going to go look at Christmas lights at this park at this time. I had 8 families show up.
That's amazing. Random. That is amazing.
It was insane, and just, and again, and we've had a couple experiences like that. We did that in Denver, did it when I visited Los Angeles a couple months ago for work and just said, hey, who wants to come to brunch? And we had a table of 3 and we all sat in LA and had brunch together. And it just really has shown me again, the need for community and how people just so desperately want to be connected. And we're far enough away from COVID now where people are craving that and wanting that so bad right now. And then, to really directly answer your question, then when we started meeting in person, we just started taking more photos. Those are the stories that we started sharing instead of sharing facts about what's the percentage of people who have disabilities? Like instead of that, we were sharing faces and we were sharing stories and we were sharing how you'll never believe this woman that I met out for brunch in LA who did a TED Talk on her limb difference, and those are the stories that we started sharing. And I think that just making that slight adjustment in the content too, really helped the branding and helping enforce what we're all about.
Yeah. What a cool example of content marketing actually serving what you were trying to accomplish, because I love that, it was like, it was a very natural place to start. It sounds like of, sharing statistics and facts and, things like that. And, is kind of, where a lot of brands, might like launch their content marketing journey from. But it is really cool that like you guys had that realization of like, well, that's actually like, awareness is what we're trying to accomplish in some ways, but even more than that, we're trying to accomplish like community and, how can we use our content in a way that helps us build community? And just what a great example that, just that simple shift of like, I'm going to be in Chicago, like who else is here? That's content that's engaging, that's sharing about you and what you're doing, but at the same time is welcoming people in. I love that worked. Yes. That's so cool.
It did. And again, because, and I will say, when we were so focused on the social media part of it, we were all drained. Our leadership team, I mean, I'm pretty sure, and I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I'm pretty sure every week we were kind of coming together being like, are we sure we want to keep doing this?
Right.
Are we sure this is worth it? And all it really took was having a couple conversations about, wait, what are we about? Is this about awareness?
Yeah.
Or is this about in-person connections? And we just kind of kept fine-tuning it to where we finally got to a place where we're like, this is all about in-person connections. So let's stop putting energy into anything that's not going to help in-person meetups, So just knowing the why and knowing the purpose and constantly reminding yourself so you don't get distracted is really helpful.
It was really interesting how you shared that, previously, and this it sounds like this is kind of common for people with limb differences or disabilities overall, to like view other people as like, well, your experience is different than mine, and to kind of like separate yourselves. With Moxie's focus being community, like we want to create communities. How do you overcome like that barrier that people have of like, well, maybe this community isn't for me because, you know, maybe these people don't have the exact same disability that I have, or, you know, things like that. Is that something that you encounter regularly as a barrier to what you're trying to accomplish?
Yes. That's actually insane that you articulated that, because I feel like that, yeah, that actually speaks to you're in tune with the disability world for sure. I think, yeah, I'm going to say some taboos that need to be said. I think, okay. I think that even more so than like, well, you're different than me. I think it's like this weird statement of, well, are you more disabled than I am?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, is your day-to-day, do you have more limitations than I do? Are you actually struggling the same way that I'm struggling?
Yeah.
Have you actually gone through the same lived experiences that I have? Because at least for me, and I don't want to speak for all people with disabilities, but at least for me, other people are born with my condition, right? But growing up, I would say Lisa arms, you know,
right?
These are Lisa arms. These are, oh my gosh, I met somebody with Lisa arms.
Yeah.
It was a me thing. No one else had it, is what I told my brain, what I told myself.
Yeah.
And so I feel like what I have learned through my research and just being in the disability world more is that that is a pretty common experience of you're kind of always, you always just kind of have this subconscious thought that you're different and unique than everyone else in a room. And so because of that, there's kind of this like one deep disqualifier that's going to keep you from fully relating to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we can sit here and talk about dating all you want and how hard first dates are, but we're actually not talking about the one thing that's impacting a lot of this discussion, which is they don't know that I'm about to walk in and have a limp.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
They don't know that I'm about to walk in and have one arm. And those are the conversations that I just believe, at least in my experience and what I've heard from other people, is there just hasn't been the space or the community to be able to have those conversations. So I think, yeah, the relatability is everything. And I think what it even comes down to, and what's been kind of beautiful to watch, is how I've kind of been fostering this community of women around me.
Yeah.
We're kind of all realizing together that even though we're different, we're all pretty much the same. You know, we all experience somewhat of the same we all experience the same human experience of feeling vulnerable or feeling imposter syndrome, so to speak.
Right.
And so it's actually been a really beautiful thing to all come together and realize, wait, we're actually connecting here. And I've been telling myself the lie my whole life that I will never be able to 100% fully connect with someone else.
Yeah.
Or fully relate. So that's been a really cool thing to watch.
Yeah. That's really interesting. There are so many questions too that I have. I'm like, so many questions.
I know there's a lot of directions we could take it.
What do you feel like have been some of the biggest wins that you've like been able to celebrate in growing this community, growing this organization? Like, what have been the things that you're like, these are the coolest milestones that we've been able to hit, or these are the kind of best moments that we've had in the journey?
Man, that's such a good question. I mentioned our ambassador program. Launching the ambassador program was a pretty big turning point for us, because not only, you know, kind of the hidden motivation behind it was we want Moxie to run regardless if us as the co-founders are actively putting in work. You know, we want this to be able to succeed past us. Yeah. Right. Kind of the business model. And so we're like, and we need to have more in-person connections. And so it's been really cool, not only to see Moxie kind of grow beyond me and the other co-founders, but also there's a desire for it. You know, we're onboarding 2 new ambassadors now who are so excited for it. So I think just to see that this isn't just something that I'm excited about, that other people are excited about, are really cool. Has been a really cool process. I think also just the people that have fallen in our laps because of this organization has been pretty overwhelming in the most beautiful of ways. Of like, for instance, maybe about a year or two ago, one of the tasks that I cannot do to save my life is put my hair in a ponytail. Okay. So people around me always have to put my hair in a ponytail. And as we were starting to develop content for Moxie, I had one of my guy friends put my hair up on a ponytail, and I was like, can we record this? Because I think just this whole dynamic is so cool. Like, number one, guys can put up hair, and number two, I can ask for help,
right, Right. That's great content.
Asking for help. And, right. And just also like putting content out there that like, I never grew up seeing somebody who couldn't put their hair up on a ponytail, right? Just having the exposure as you're scrolling of seeing yourself is so impactful. And so anyway, I posted this reel of my friend putting my hair up on a ponytail, and I kind of just thought it was stupid. It was like funny, like, haha, guys can help too. And there were two significant moments that came from that. One girl, she DM'd me right away, and I'd never heard of her. She DM'd me. She goes, I had no idea other people struggled with this.
Wow.
I was like,
that's so special.
Oh my gosh.
That's like,
even just that is worth it.
Yeah.
Right. That came out of it. And then also, there was a mom who lives in South Carolina who it literally popped up on, it's not your For You page. What's on Instagram? Just your Reels scrolling. You're just scrolling on Reels. I don't know. And she didn't even follow Moxie. It just popped up on her screen and saw that video. And she sent me the sweetest DM. And she has a 5-year-old daughter who was born with almost my exact arms. And she goes, even just to see a successful woman like asking friends for help and just seeing it, just seeing it was so impactful. I ended up Zooming with this. Maybe she's a bit older than 5 now that I'm talking. She might be like 8 or 9, but I ended up Zooming with her, and we were on Zoom. Like, she was like, "Oh, let me show, how do you put on your jacket? Can we like put on our jacket together?" Aww. And we were like putting on our jackets together on Zoom. And so anyway, I could talk about these stories for hours, but when you talk about significant turning points and just significant wins I've really had to remind myself, again, going back to the purpose of Moxie, it is so easy to get caught up in the numbers and the growth and, the like quantitative data of it all.
Yeah.
And what Moxie is all about is not that, if I can walk away from this with impacting those 2 people's lives, I mean, that is worth it to me. That is why I love Moxie. That is why I started it. And so even just having these really small, impactful moments with individual people have kept me going and have made me so passionate about continuing it.
I love that. Wow. You just dropped like so many like special stories, but then also just like nuggets of wisdom right there. That was really interesting. Okay. There's more questions that I have than time that there is for questions, but I want to come back to something that's slightly separate. But you mentioned that understanding your Enneagram at the beginning of our conversation was really valuable for you. What did that look like? Especially like you're an Enneagram 2, which is often seen as, the helper, but you got the wing 3, which is the achiever. So what did it look like or shift in your mind to better understand like that aspect of who you are?
Yeah. Oh, it changed everything. I did not want to be a 2. I fought it.
Why?
I fought it for years. I wanted to be a 7.
You're like, I'm fun. I can be fun.
I'm fun. And I think also the stereotype is that women, particularly Christian women, tend to type themselves as a 2. And I'm like, I'm not like everyone else, which, not getting into the nitty-gritty of the Enneagram, but when 2s are in growth, we go to 4s. And so by me saying, I don't want to be like everyone else is such a 4 thing for me to say. But anyway, I derail. But I think one of the biggest things that learning that I was a 2 shifted after I fought it for so hard. And I think one of the reasons that I fought it for so hard was, the Enneagram is revealing. It's exposing. I think people kind of think that these personality assessments are like all fun and you're kind of silly for doing them. But if you actually use it as a tool for some deep reflection, like it hits home, I mean, it can be deep. It reveals some pretty like ugly parts of your motivation, but then it's also such a beautiful way of showing how you can get out of it and how you can grow and how you can become the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
So I think for me, what it really taught me, so again, not to get into the nitty gritty, but the Enneagram, if you know your number, you have growth and stress numbers.
Yeah.
And so when you're in growth and when you're in an environment where you're thriving, you take on kind of the more positive attributes of a specific number. So for me, that's a 4. And I see a lot of the 4 characteristics, which is the individualistic person, the love creativity and is okay being not like everyone else. I really have not struggled with, I want to be like everyone else. Yeah. I think I actually lean way too far on the other side of, ooh, don't compare me to anybody. I want to be my own unique person. Yeah. And then in my stress, I take on some characteristics of an 8, which is the challenger.
Okay.
And I actually, so this will more directly answer your question is, I think a negative or a incorrect stereotype with your stress number is that it's negative. Right. So you're like, dang, when I like go into stress, I'm going to take on the negative parts of an 8. But kind of a paradigm shift that I learned through my Enneagram life coaching was your stress number is actually there to serve you. And you actually need to lean into that. And it actually protects you in scenarios. Yeah. And I've actually seen me use my like 8 challenger characteristics in such really awesome ways that I'm actually like standing up for myself now. Yeah. And I'm not being a people pleaser, and I'm actually willing to be more confident. I mean, talk about self-confidence, what you talked about in my class, I'm actually willing to be more confident in the creative ventures that I am pursuing, like you said, I am kind of pursuing a lot in a lot of different directions, but it's all coming back to the same purpose of, I just want to help people say yes to the things that they feel called to say yes to, so through teaching, through Moxie, et cetera, et cetera. And so I really just feel like learning the growth and the stress and learning, kind of just putting language to, the characteristics or the thoughts and the mindset that I sway to and growth and stress has been really helpful.
That is so interesting. That's really cool. And that actually is really cool to hear you, call out the positive aspects of the 8, that you like swing to in those moments of stress. Cause I mean, that almost is, I mean, that you're able to embrace that in such healthy ways. I mean, what a way to compensate for a weakness that like many 2s have, which is that kind of like people pleasing, kind of like overcompensation for what other people need instead of what you need. And that's really cool that you have seen those, shifted that perspective of how that part of you exists.
And you're a 3, right? Do you know where your growth and stress goes?
I don't see, I'm not in depth enough. Okay. Do you know off the top of your head what they are?
6 and 9. You would go to a 6 and a 9.
That's interesting.
Which, oh man, we can dive into it more. I'm actually like halfway through my Enneagram coaching certification thing right here. So we could talk about Enneagram for a long time.
That is so fun. So it was a really interesting shift because when I initially took the test, maybe 6 years ago or something, I was a 2 as well, 2ing 3. But as I started to better understand myself, as I, was part of it, like became a dad, but then launched my business and, just like over time, just started to understand who I was a little bit better. I realized that I had the backwards. And, when I took the test again, it was a 3-wing 2. And it just, honestly, that shift alone of just kind of putting myself in the right category there, and seeing that was like such a game changer, because as I started to then understand, previously where I would understand like my obsession with what other people thought, I always thought of that, from the 2 lens, which is still a part of me, since, that is my wing. But I always thought of that as just like, oh, like I, care a lot about what other people need. Like, I'm always trying to, provide for other people. But really, when I started to understand that, it's like, actually, I just care way too much about what people think of me. And I'm wanting to meet their needs so that they see me as successful and see me as having enough time for them and see me as, I've structured my life in a way that, that they can be proud of me and think that I'm however I want them to think of me. Then I started to be like, okay, now I better understand my own journey of growth and better understand my own actions. And that was a shift. That alone was a big shift for me. Just being in the right category.
That's so insightful.
Yeah.
And even going back to when you came to my class and talked, your number one point, you gave such a beautiful, well-articulated kind of 3-point slides, but your first point was be self-aware, like know yourself, and I love that you said that, because even in some of the talks that I have when I go speak with students, my very first thing that I always say is, you got to learn how to talk about yourself. You got to be self-aware. Yeah. So that's why I get so excited when we're talking about this, because it's like, man, if you are just feeling stuck and you're like, man, I want to be successful in this area, I want to keep going. Like I always say, put so much time and energy, like invest in knowing the words. I mean, interpersonal communication, right? Yeah. Invest in knowing what words to use to describe yourself, because you're actually going to reveal the deep motivation that you have of the why you're doing this. Yeah. And then you won't get confused and defeated down the road when you're like, wait, I'm not doing this so that other people look at it and think that we're the biggest organization. I'm doing it so that I can have a one-on-one meet up with somebody, right? Like that motivation. And I think that's what the Enneagram can help reveal, is like, what is the internal motivation of why we're developing business, why we're doing marketing, why we're, going on any venture. You got to know your deep motivation. Yeah. Because that'll inform everything.
Well, Lisa, we're like so aligned on like all the things that we think and how we say them.
That's why I'm like, I feel like we could talk for hours. Even when you came to my class, I had to prevent myself from like, being like screaming in the back. That story that you shared about when you were hiring in your company, and you literally based the decision based on how they communicated with you and how it made you feel when they were emailing you. I was like, I've been screaming that from the rooftops for years, and no one else has ever said that. And I get so pumped. So anyway,
Well, I know I've said it a few times. There is so many more questions that I have for you. And I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your story and some of what you're doing at Moxie Adaptive, and just all of your perspectives. This has been really fun. So thank you for hanging out with me. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for hanging out with me. That's so fun.
Yep, I love it. Thank you, Lisa.